My people, we're ready to mount up like an eagle. Stand and fight against evil. A system rigged and deceitful. King.
What's good? I'm your host, Sean Slaughter, and welcome to the King Talks podcast, where we're all about the truth, community, and discussing the things you care about. And today we're going to have a table talk that focuses on the interview that we had with Jason Wilson and his incredible book, Cry Like a Man. At our roundtable, we have Steve Stack. He is the King Movement president of the Charlotte chapter and also a board member. And we also have Adam Coleman, a.k.a. Scott Lane, a.k.a. the Black Bruce Wayne. Y'all know him. Y'all love him. He's an apologist and an author. On this table talk, we get personal, and we talk about how the book Cry Like a Man affected us and our experiences. We talked about why it's so important to know where you came from, as far as your lineage, your father and your grandfather. We also talked about trauma and how trauma has affected the Black community and what that means as far as identity and who we are in Christ. And lastly, we talked about crying. Listen.
My people, we're ready to mount up like an eagle. Stand and fight against evil. A system rigged and deceitful. King, you can hear it when I rhyme. I'm a king, renewed in my mind. I'm a king, I got a different bloodline. I'm a king, jump, I am a king. I'm a king.
What up, King? It's your host, Sean Slaughter, and you are now listening to the Table Talk. And on today's Table Talk, we're going to be going over Cry Like a Man, written by Jason Wilson. We had the podcast. We had Jason Wilson on the podcast during our last show, and it was just phenomenal, amazing, dropped so many gems. And so be sure to listen to that. And we'll be touching on his topics and even expanding further on the dialogue. On the phone right now, I have two distinguished gentlemen. Let me start with Steve Stack. Steve, say what's up to the people and tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Steven Stack. I'm actually the King Charlotte chapter president and newly appointed to the board as well. So really
no,
good stuff.
Good to have you, Steve.
Here.
Word. Good to have you, bro.
Thanks, man.
And of course, everybody knows Adam Coleman, a.k.a. Adam Scott Lane Coleman, a.k.a. Scott Lane, a.k.a. the Black Bruce Wayne. You know what I'm saying? He's been a frequent host, guest on this podcast. Adam, say what's up, and just tell him what you do. Tell him what you do, bro.
Yeah, no doubt, man. I appreciate it. I got 1,000 different aliases or whatever. Most often, I'm on the show, dealing with apologetics. But I'm actually really excited to talk about, this topic here because I feel like some people know I come from a mental health background. Like professionally, I'm a social worker. So the topic that we're dealing with today, man, is right up my alley from a professional standpoint, man. Just dealing with the emotions and things like that. So it was a great interview. I'm definitely, hyped to talk about it.
No doubt. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. And where I want to start is I started with Jason talking about the lynching of his grandfather and just the effect that had on his life. And it reminded me, and it caused me to reflect on history. Now, I don't know about you guys, and maybe you guys can talk a little bit about you, but I'll start with myself. As a Black man, as I go back and think about the history of my family, of course, I know my father. My grandfather I knew, but honestly, there was not much I knew about my grandfather. And I learned a lot about my grandfather at his death. So, for instance, I knew that I'm a saver, and I knew that my grandfather was a saver, and other things like that kind of solidified that connection between me and my grandfather and our habits and personality and things like that. Past my grandfather, on my father's side, I didn't know my great grandfather or great great grandfather, and on my mom's side, I really didn't even know my grandfather on that side. They left him, back in Tennessee and came to New York, and I didn't really know much about him. And I found it interesting when Jason talked about his lineage, and it was important to him because his lineage gave him identity. Can you guys maybe tell me, if you feel comfortable, do you know your lineage? Do you know your grandfather? Are you aware of maybe some of the things that personality traits, identities, things that your grandfather had? How is it that important to you specifically in your life? Does it have any meaning? And any one of y'all can take that.
Steve, you want to take a stab at it, Steve? Or?
Yeah. I'll start. I'm actually glad you asked that question. I heard a lot about my grandfather on my mom's side. So just quick background, my mom is number 12 out of 12 kids. So she was the youngest. And so you can imagine she's got cousins that are way older than her that could be, her parents. But the things that I would hear about my grandfather was that he was a man of God, very compassionate, loved to laugh, a giver, and just a lot of warm feelings about him, especially for my mom, because I believe he was either 60 or very close to 60 when he had my mother. So he was always very thankful and grateful, and I would hear that from my mom, just telling stories about him and how he just was an upstanding man. And even in a time, because he was born right at the end of the 1800s, so even him living across a span of time where there was a lot of inequality in America, he didn't walk with his head held down. Like, he walked with his head held high, had confidence, stressed education. So there's got several teachers that were within my aunts and uncles. So for me, it gave me great pride and strength, not only just in my faith, but just knowing that I had a strong family heritage behind me. And as far as my dad's father, all I knew is that he was diligent, that he was a hard worker, and that I can remember my dad telling stories about going with his dad to the marketplace to buy rice. And my dad's actually number 10 out of 12. And they went to go get some rice from the marketplace, and he remembered that there was actually a white man that was selling the rice, and he charged my grandfather more than what he was charging other people that weren't black, other whites. And I remember how that impacted my father, in him saying, man, I never want to be in a place where I have to go through something like that, like what I saw my dad go through. So a lot of things that kind of shaped my worldview.
Wow, that's dope.
That's dope.
What about you, Scott Lang?
Yeah, I'm gonna follow that. I was kind of echo it a little bit, Actually, it was kind of a strange way. Like, this whole conversation made me think about the Black Panther movie, because throughout the whole movie, when he was in this, I guess, non-black, Panther mode, he would, the main character always introduced himself as T'Challa, son of T'Chaka, I just thought that was really interesting how they put that in there, and even when one of the main scenes where he's fighting M'Baku, like, the turnaround in that fight was when his mom screams out, "Show him who you are." You know what I'm saying? Mm. So, like, that identity piece, being tied to one's lineage and all that, it was very prominent in that movie. And I think it really does echo in, well, certainly in my experience, and for what I've gleaned from a lot of other folks in the Black community, and probably just people in general. Interestingly enough, I was just at unfortunately, my grandma passed recently, about a month ago. And, at the funeral, I mean, that's prime time for hearing those stories and just the oral history of one's family, and I think sometimes we take those opportunities for granted, being in the moment. But one thing that stuck out to me was, and I never knew this, but apparently the land that my grandmother owned had been passed down to her by, I think, her grandfather, I think by her grandfather, or maybe even great-grandfather, who himself was a freedman. He'd been a slave and then been freed, So he had actually worked as a slave on a plantation, and then right down the road end up with, getting like 100 acres of land. And that 100 acres is still occupied by his descendants today, including my grandmother, my aunts, uncles, and all that kind of stuff. Like the land that they live on had been purchased by my however many great-grandfather, after he was, I guess it was after the Civil War, he's freed from slavery and just, worked his way toward, getting that land. And just something about it, it does kind of instill a sense of empowerment and dignity because, growing up in school, it's pretty much like our story begins on the cotton field. It begins and ends with oppression just about, But to hear this other side of, people from your lineage overcoming, and in the context of maybe oppression, still fighting and attaining things, that it does instill a sense of dignity. Like on my dad's side, I didn't know this but until maybe 2 years ago, but apparently we had some folks who were on the local level who were very much involved in the civil rights movement, and actually one was a lawyer, and I fought a certain case locally that ended up, where I guess like a segregated library had to desegregate or something like that, So I've got, freedom fighters in my lineage, and that kind of stuff, especially given what I do now, with the True ID podcast and just kind of really redeeming our history, it just really, I guess I would use that word again, it's just really empowering, and it's definitely a source of dignity. And I think that, other people groups, maybe they don't have that same hurdle in terms of like just the immediacy of slavery, obviously, and that kind of oppression to kind of, and just that fractured lineage, being torn from, where they come from initially, they don't necessarily have that particular hurdle to overcome. But one thing I've come, maybe people may disagree with me, but one thing that I've come to see is that I don't necessarily, I can find value in my lineage here. You know what I'm saying? I don't necessarily, it's not to say that I don't want to know more about where I come from in Africa. It's not to say that those things shouldn't be desired and aren't important. But I think that there's so much to value in terms of what people have done on this continent, since we've got here, that can at least be a starting point. Even in our own family, that can at least be a starting point in terms of your own family history of really just kind of promoting that esteem, self-esteem and whatnot, that sense of dignity, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that and to a certain extent. I think one of the issues, and what I'm agreeing with is finding value in your African American experience. You know what I'm saying, and also finding value, in that African experience. I think the issues that we face. I'm an educator, and I teach kids that get kicked out of school, have community charges. I teach an alternative school. And the one thing that the majority, I would say 95% of the kids have in common is a fractured family, no dad in the home, and really don't know, even though they may be around, but really don't have some of those rich experiences that you guys talked about to shape their identity. And I think it's important, to know your grandparents, your grandfather. It's funny, I'm getting old, so I'm telling the same story over and over again. That's how you know you're getting old. But I was teaching a class, and the class had one white student and a bunch of black students, and I asked them, what do you value in your family? This was in middle school. What do you value? And Some students said my mom. A lot of students said, some of the boys said, my Jordans, my PS4, and the one white student said my Irish heritage. And I found that to be interesting because even in middle school as a sixth grader, he understood that there was a lineage before him that connected him to something, and he drew his identity from it. I think with us, and this is probably the next question that we're going to get into, is, our identity starts traumatically. And Jason talked about post-traumatic slave disorder or post-traumatic slave symptoms, or just the whole idea of having literally a culture of people whose beginnings on this country was traumatic, and how that trauma carries through, ripples really throughout the culture. What are some of the things that you guys see that are within our culture that you think trauma has affected us? Maybe from slavery, from the past, from segregation. Are there particular things that you guys can see where you can say, man, these are some things that our culture is struggling with and dealing with that we really have to overcome because of those issues of slavery and families ripped apart on the plantations and things like that?
Well, I think it's very interesting. So the thing is, we have this slavery piece. I think it gets so much of the weight in terms of when people, I guess, want to diagnose our community. But I think we do have to appreciate that from slavery onward, it's really this protracted series of traumatic experiences culture-wide. You know what I'm saying? And I think that, what I see, I guess I'll just put it this way. What I see is if you just look at the historical record, coming off of the plantations, you do have a people group who has experienced a great deal of brokenness, but you do see a sort of hope, I think. You know what I'm saying? Looking at the literacy rates, I think I said it on the show before, but I want to say 5% of those who were enslaved were literate, coming off of the cotton fields, so to speak. But within a generation, that decreased to about illiteracy, increased to about 30%. So you have this massive, growth in people, learning to read. You have during the Reconstruction period, about a 10-year period after, directly following the Civil War, you have, African Americans start businesses. I think there's about 3,000 African American elected officials in the South. You know what I'm saying? Black people were, I'm not saying they were balling out of control, but, they demonstrated that they were able to, get out there and achieve things. You know what I'm saying? They weren't so incapacitated. They couldn't bring about, meaningful achievement. But with that being said, about 10 years after slavery, when Reconstruction ends, and you have a lot of the protections that Black people have been afforded were just taken away. You had the Ku Klux Klan, forms, and it just wreaking just havoc, in terms of truly being a terrorist group, not just in the South, but really in various parts of the North as well. Then you have the Jim Crow era, that where you have people who are in this country, they're supposed to be the land of the free, and they're not freely able to start businesses however they want and sell to whomever they want, and they're just, their ability to earn is significantly impeded by who they can do business with. Of course, we talked about redlining on the show. You got Black folks going overseas fighting wars for America and coming home and being lynched. So I think with all these things piled up, what I see now is a sense of apathy in a way.
Explain that. What do you mean?
Was that?
What do you mean?
Well, what I mean by that is I think it reminds me of that passage. I want to say it's in Proverbs where it says, "A hope deferred makes a heart sick." But when a desire comes, it's a wellspring of life. And I think that as a community, our hearts are sick. You know what I'm saying? When you're told that you're supposed to be able to get out and earn something for yourself, this whole country was based upon the idea of being able to, exercise your talents obtain wealth and then pass it down to later generations. Well, when you redline people out of that, then when you have this systematized banking scheme that prevents a community from being able to do that, and you tell them, oh, well, you just, get your education and be all right, but then, you can get your education, but you still can't get a home loan like you ought to, and then you can't build equity. After a while, your heart gets sick. After a while, you're like, man, well, forget it. And and I think that you have this notion that, no matter what I do, there's always going to be this overarching sledgehammer to keep me back. So, why be all I can be? I remember I had this one client that I was working with, this kid, and from a very difficult area of the city. And I asked him one time, I said, what is something that a white person could do to earn a living for themselves, to be wealthy? And he's like, oh, you could be a doctor, you could be the president, you could, own a business. I mean, he just kind of rattles off 4 or 5 different things, right? And so then I asked him, well, what is something that a black person could do to support themselves? Oh, well, you could, sell drugs. You could be a hitman for hire. You could sell bootleg CDs, DVDs, or whatever. I mean, his list was very much so different for black folks than it was for white people. And so his expectation for himself and for, based upon who he was, what he could do, was just basement low, beyond low. And I think that that's symptomatic of something that runs throughout our communities. And, Sean, you mentioned it, during the interview as it relates to hip hop, what you see on BET and whatnot, you just see, black folks, degrading themselves and just kind of taking a very, I guess you could say maladaptive lifestyle, selling drugs and doing wrong and glorifying it because it's like, well, Dad, what else do we got? What else do we got? And so I think that's what I see in the community. I think I see, I'm not saying that means it's every single person, but I do think there's an undercurrent of apathy. It's just like, man, forget it. I just get by how I can get by, but it's not for me to be wealthy. It's not for me, to own a business and be successful in X, Y, and Z. Whatever my dreams are, maybe they'll happen, maybe they won't, but there's something out there that is able to prevent me from doing it. So I'm going to kind of, cut my efforts short a little bit and just make it how I can.
Okay. Steve, are you seeing similar things with, some of the past trauma that our community has experienced and even some of the present trauma? What are you seeing? What are some of the effects on our community that, that you're seeing?
I mean, even from an early age, I can remember the first time that it really hit me, that things were different, because earlier we talked about some of the positive experiences that we had within our own families. So my parents did a really good job of giving me a positive self-image to build confidence off of, between, man, you got a godly heritage, this is what the Bible says, to, hey, here's stuff in your own family. And I can remember, like, early, maybe around like first or second grade, being in school and just talking with friends and being like, man, Steve or Stack, man, why are you talking white? And I legitimately didn't even know what they meant by the statement. I'm like, man, well, I don't know what you mean. So, you're talking to a kid, I'm like 6 or 7 years old. I'm like, well, what does that mean? And as I'm listening to my friend explain what he means, I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. So what you're saying is because I'm speaking in a way that makes sense, being articulate, that means I'm talking white? Well, what does talking black mean then? And they were like, well, that's not really what I'm saying. I'm like, but isn't it what you're saying? And thankfully, having parents that I could go home to and just talk to them about it, and them reassure me, like, oh, no, you don't need to dumb down to fit in. Encourage your friends to step up, to move beyond that type of thinking. So, I mean, that's a real life example that I can clearly remember from an early age, and obviously getting that reassurance from my parents. I had even more confidence to say, man, I don't have to pull back just to fit in. So that's just like a simple social example. Yeah.
Steve, I want to dig into that a little bit further because that's really good. Now, I didn't have that experience, unfortunately. I was a thug. I was your typical, fighting teachers, getting kicked out of school. I was a jock. Unfortunately, I fell prey to that. But this is interesting. This is really good. And what you're talking about, Steve, still happens. I'm telling you, I'm in the classroom. Still happens today. Simply because in middle school, and sometimes it happens late elementary or early middle, but a boy begins to especially black boy, begins to kind of form his identity and find his peer group. And a lot of times his peer group is listening to a certain type of music. And if he doesn't listen to that certain type of music, or like you said, say those certain type of slang words, then he's white, he ain't black, he's not down or whatever. When you got to middle school, because that was an early experience, when you got to middle school and then eventually high school, how did you navigate that? And this may be helpful for some young black men. I think this is one of the hardest things for young black men today is to navigate that whole, what is black? Is black listening to Lil Yachty and calling girls bees? If I do this thing, am I really white? You know what I'm saying? And not black? Like, how did you navigate that going through maybe upper middle school, going into high school with some of the other black kids who were saying those things?
Right. So it's almost kind of sad to have to say this. I'm glad you asked me the question because it really got me thinking. But because I was a really good athlete, I was able to pass through.
Yeah,
so
the athletes always can, man. The athletes always can. Okay.
Right. So, like, I eventually, I would start to try to listen to what people are listening to. And obviously, you're around your friends. You pick up how to say what people are saying just in slang and just rolling with your friends. But with me, especially in high school, I mean, I got to a place where I was getting recruited to play Division I football. So it helped me in that I was really smart. So I would be in advanced classes, but I also was connected with my guys. If I played basketball and football in middle school, and then in high school, ultimately I ended up doing football and running track during the off season because I'm like, hey, I doubt I'm going to grow to be like 6'8". I'm only 6 feet tall. I'm like, basketball is probably not going to work for me, but I think I could really do something in football. And so because of that basically gave me more of a pass to be able to navigate through. And I know it would have been harder if it was purely academics. Hate to say that.
Gotcha. That's good, man. That's really good. You want to add anything to that, Lane, before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to kind of, echo that because I was the same way, man. Like, coming up, particularly when you get to your, early 90s, when the Fresh Prince came out, I was like, if you talk standard English, then cats would call you like Carlton Banks. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're doing that Carlton Banks. You know what I mean? It's like, so it went from being Uncle Tom to Carlton Banks when I was a kid, and nobody wanted to be that. But for me, because I had a crossover, I'm saying I was at the basketball court every day, that helped, you know what I'm saying? Right. And, but still, you do have this tension between, what you've been taught at home and then what you feel like you have to take on when you step outside the home. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you feel like you have to impersonate, even if you're not like trying to be gangster necessarily, you feel like you have to impersonate what it means to be black. Not realizing that, no, blackness isn't confined to a certain subset of the culture. You know what I'm saying? Of our population. There's a broader definition of what it means to be black. You don't have to sacrifice who you are to fit within somebody else's definition. But for somebody who's young, it's very hard, I think, to navigate that. And I don't want to say near impossible, but it's very difficult to do that alone. I'm saying the best way to manage it is for what is like Steve Stack describes, to have somebody in the home who's able to reinforce, that young person, you know what I'm saying? Or even if it's not in the home, somebody within the family unit or a church or what have you, somebody to come alongside you to stand with you as you are, being who you are in the face of folks who say that isn't good enough. You know what I'm saying? So, that's kind of where I would go with it.
Okay. Well, getting back to Jason's book, Cry Like a Man, please be sure to check it out, y'all, as y'all listening in. He has a chapter on the promise of promiscuity, and later on he gets married to the girl that he eventually got pregnant, and that turned out to be just a wonderful story. But the reality is, in school and even outside of school, I go play basketball, and when I go play basketball at the Y, and I'm, just hanging out with the dudes, and, I'm 42. A lot of times I'm playing with guys in their 20s and 30s. And you really can't have a conversation for no longer than 5 minutes before they start talking about some kind of girl or what's about to happen that night, or something they about to hit, or something da-da-da-da-da-da. And I find it, sad that with some of our young black men, that their time is so much being consumed. And he faced this pressure. We all faced this pressure where our time was so consumed with getting names and numbers, and not just getting names and numbers, but having sex. What are some of the things that you think that we can tell our young men to help them navigate this? Because everybody goes, I don't care if you're black or white, everybody goes through puberty, right? And everybody goes through male and female attraction. That's very natural. But it seems that our young men have taken that thing to almost a sport level, and it can be dangerous. What are some of the ways or some of the things that we can tell our young men, concerning promiscuity, concerning dating? What are some of the things, and I'll share myself as well, but what are some of the things that when your kids get of age, will you say to them concerning dating and all that type of stuff, when it comes to like being in high school, middle school, whatever?
Yeah. Let me take a shot at that right quick. I think the most important thing, and I'm really not trying to sound churchy about it, but seriously, I think the most important thing is to share with them, in terms of my kids, I'm thinking, what the Word of God has to say about what it means to be a man. There's a very interesting discussion going on right now because I want to say maybe a week or so ago, or at least fairly recently, Gillette, the razor company or whatever, they released a commercial that is in some ways kind of challenging what some people are calling nowadays toxic masculinity. And I just find it very interesting because I think what happens is certainly for those of us in the church, like we've almost adopted a definition of what it means to be a man from the world. We've adopted it from the world, at least in some respects. And so, like in the commercials showing, kids getting bullied and things like that, and just a number of different things that we almost take for granted as being, this is what boys do. Boys will be boys. That's something they kind of showcases in the commercial. And I just find it interesting. I just think that, even, to this conversation, conquest, having, many notches on your belt as you possibly can, getting with as many chicks as you possibly can, that's considered to be definitional of what it means to be a man, right? But obviously God's word says something totally different. You know, God's word talks a lot about discipline. It talks a lot about commitment. It talks about marriage. It talks about, you know, fidelity, all those kinds of things of what it means to be a man. And those don't line up necessarily with what you find in the world. And I think that what we have to do, at least with you know, what I'm thinking about my kids, training them up in the way they should go. What does it mean to be a man? You know what I'm saying? First of all. And I think that, you know, it comes not just with teaching, but also living it out as well. I'm saying, how am I interacting with my wife? You know, am I respecting her? Am I showing affection toward her? Am I handling the bills properly? You know what I'm saying? Am I loving my family by managing our resources? You know what I'm saying? And being faithful to the home that way. All those things, I think, come together to demonstrate what it means to be a man. Like, I know, like, my dad, who's passed on now, we never had a conversation about what a man is. But just from the way that he lived, you know what I'm saying? I tell my wife all the time, like, I never really, like, when I got older, I didn't ask my dad too many questions about what I need to do and how do I navigate this, how do I navigate that. The example that he set gave me the blueprint, and I just rolled with it. You know what I'm saying? And I think that that's so powerful. And so now that, granted, when I'm at the basketball court, now, granted, you know, me, you know, Sean, you know, I haven't been to the gym in about 5 years.
You haven't been to the gym in 5 years.
But when I do return to the gym, you know, when those conversations come up, I think that we have to look ourselves, you know, look at ourselves and say, am I man enough to be a man in this situation? Or am I going to pretend that the world's definition of manhood is something that I have to bow my knee to in this situation? You know what I'm saying? I think that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. And, you know, hopefully the answer is no. I think what we need to do is demonstrate, what does a man look like? You know what I'm saying? What does it mean? Like, you know, when I'm at my job and old boy elbows me because, you know, some female walks by and like, yo, look at that. You know, am I going to, you know, just disregard my vows to my wife and participate in that? And am I going to, you know, take the risk of saying, okay, I might not be approved of by you by looking away and not indulging in that, but I'm man enough to be who I am in front of you, regardless of what your definition of a man is. And I think that's how you change the culture, is being what you talk about and then teaching it to your kids and exemplifying it, you know, for them, you know, as an example.
That's good. What about you, Steve? I don't know how many kids you have or how young they are, but when it comes to that point, how will you address that issue?
So I've got 2 girls and a boy, and my son is the youngest, and I can't echo what Adam, a.k.a. Scott Lane, a.k.a. everything, just said. Man, that's so rich and it's so true. Even though it's simple, it doesn't mean it's easy to live that in front of my children, because it's not even just my son, but even my daughters who would look to, okay, well, what kind of man should I be looking for? In addition to my son saying, hey, what kind of man should I be? Of having those conversations and encouraging him of, hey man, I was in school. I remember, you know, I went to middle school, high school. I was in college. Most guys aren't doing the kind of damage they say they're doing anyway.
They lying, they capping.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely right.
They're lying. You know, so because they're just trying to fit in too. So just trying to encourage them. Hey man, it's okay to be different. It's okay to set a new kind of standard, because most kids are unsure of themselves anyway. How do I know? Because I was there. If I didn't have not only good parents, but good people, good friends, good mentors around me, I'd have been right there with them. So that would be more so my approach, is talking to them about it, but more importantly, living it in front of them to say, hey man, look how I love your mom. How would you feel if I had several women in addition to your mother? You wouldn't like it. So just things like that.
And I think both of you guys are saying the same thing that I would say is number one, they have to see a prototype. When that man is absent, then really there is no prototype to follow. There is no template. The template could be something on a movie or something in a song. But when that son does not have that dad there, or that daughter does not have that dad there, then really it's just, it's a free for all. It's, you kind of learn what you learn, and you go from that point. And I have two girls, 15 and 12, and I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound, this is going to be interesting. You probably find this interesting, Lane, but I don't, as somebody who's a musician and loves music, I really do try to listen to everything. There's some things I enjoy, and then there's other things I just check out to kind of study, and kind of see where the kids are and things like that, especially being in school. But one of the, and it's going to sound interesting, but one of the things that I've had to do with my girls is that I've had to keep them away from rap music. Now, intentionally. Now, mind you, I was a Christian rap artist for 15 years. And so they knew my music, you know what I'm saying? And they knew like a Lecrae, or Andy Mineo, or, back in the day, a Corey Red or something like that. But when it came to just, because I wasn't the type of parent that was like, we're going to listen to worship music 24 hours a day, like good music. And so we would listen to, other music, and of course, be selective. But when it came to rap music, that was almost off the table, simply because there was no music out there other than now. They're older now, and you have a Kendrick Lamar now, but you still have to filter that. Maybe a J. Cole, but you still have to filter that. But really, overall, there was no, outside of the Christian realm, there was no rap music that I would dare, not like I was playing it, for myself 24 hours a day, but even in the car, just get in the car and the song comes on, I would change it. You know what I'm saying? On just kind of your regular pop station, I would change it. And now it's gotten to the point where my daughters, they find that, like, they'll hear somebody like Lil Pump, right? Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang. And they laugh at it. They're like, this is stupid. What the heck is he talking about? You know what I'm saying? and now their take on rap music is like, this is stupid. You know what I'm saying? It's dumb. And I've had to do that for my daughters simply because the message within rap music had that toxic masculinity, but it also tore females down to the point where females begin putting on that trauma like a blanket, calling themselves bees, really almost swapping places with the men. You know what I'm saying? Where the men said, I'm gonna do this to you, and the woman was like, no, I'm gonna do this to you. You feel what I'm saying? And so now when my girls hear that, because now, one is in high school, one's in middle school, now when they hear that stuff, it's like, yo, that's dumb. But when I go to school and with the kids that I teach, it's the girls singing the boys' rap songs. And the boys' rap songs that are degrading women. And I even say to them, that in that song, he's saying this and this and this about a female, and that's you. How do you feel about that? I just listen to the beat, I just like it, it's cool. And don't even realize that it's shaping their identity as a woman and their approach to men as a woman. And so I know that's definitely one thing that I've had to do, but I also will echo you guys. I'm very intentional, in how I raise my children, and I'm very intentional in, how I talk to them. Of course, I'm myself, and we goof around and have a good time. But I know that as they enter puberty and they start having these feelings and so on and so forth, I'm very intentional that, yes, we're a Christian family and we're a black family, but also this is what a black man looks like. And there are many slices of black men. Don't just buy into the one image that's being portrayed in your high school or middle school. And that's what Jason was talking about. He was talking about, I got to high school and middle school, and I was just getting this one image of a black man, and this is what a young black man does, and I was expected to do those things. And I'm telling my girls, nah, just like there's many different shades and classes and types of white folks, the same thing happens to black folks. There's many shades. You got your ignorant ones from your educated ones. You know what I'm saying? You have your artistic ones to your stylish ones. It across the board. So don't get locked into this is what a black man or a black boy is. Your dad is the prototype, and whatever God's going to send you, He's going to send you something that's in line with your standards, your morals, and what He has for you. Yeah, man. So that's
that's good, man, because I've got a daughter as well, man, and I think you're absolutely right. That not only, like, so many times we think about fatherlessness in the black community, we look at it from the standpoint of how it's affecting these young boys becoming men, but fatherlessness is also equally as traumatic, and problematic when you think about how it affects our daughters. You know what I'm saying? If you don't have a man in the home who's showing what you're being that prototype, then when they go out to look for a man, they don't even know what they're looking for. They don't know what they're looking for. They're just trying to, put pieces together. And you're right. I mean, they're looking to, the music and the culture, and and you end up with, I don't know exactly why, but you're right. I mean, you have women now kind of taking the place of men and being like almost the aggressor, or that may not be the right term, but just being the ones who are willing to kind of peddle themselves sexually or otherwise, for approval, or maybe even monetary gain. It's very sad, man. Very sad.
Yeah. Well, I want to throw this last question out there, and I like this show. This show is going a little bit more introspective than I planned, but I like this because I think that's what Cry Like a Man was. It really was an introspective look at Jason's life and then some of the lessons that we can learn within our own lives. So I like the flow that the show is going. Thank you guys for being so honest. I'm going to ask you to be honest again.
You saw that, Steve. That was a setup right there. It's about to be next question is about
I'm asking you to be honest. The book is called Cry Like a Man. Do you cry like a man? Have you cried in front of your wife? Do you believe? And hey, look, I'm asking the questions, but I'm gonna answer them too. For you know what I'm saying? Just to be a good sport. Just to let you know.
Right.
Have you cried like a man? And if you have, or let's just not say crying, but whether it's crying or being emotional or being vulnerable, I think is the point that he's getting to on how you feel. Have you done that? And how did that feel? Why have you done it? If you haven't done it, why haven't you done it? The floor is yours.
I'll go first on this one because it's funny you're asking that question. The last time that I cried was actually this morning.
Wow.
At my church. So I sing, I lead in music as far as worship through music, and I was praying to end the worship set, and we had just finished singing a song talking about I am who you say I am, and like as I was praying, like even though there were people there, I really was talking to God as if people weren't there. But obviously, you have to be aware that there are a congregation there. But like literally, I started to tear up when, as I'm praying and I'm saying, "Man, God, all the times that I've sinned against you, that I've literally spit in your face. Like, I know the right thing to do, and I'm doing my own thing anyway. And not only do you call me friend instead of enemy, you call me a son. You say I'm an heir with Christ, a co-heir with Christ. I'm like, man, it's overwhelming. You know what I mean? I'm like, man, I'm so undeserving of your grace. And it literally overtook me as I was praying, that I was just tearing up, just being like, man, God, you are so good. And to kind of answer the other question, how did it feel? Man, it was freeing. Like, there were people that were like, man, like, Stack, because they called me by the last name, like, man, Stack, man. Like, something changed when you were praying. And just being comfortable and saying, man, I'm not worried about crying, because Jesus, and I'll use the word that Jason was using, Jesus was the most comprehensive man. And yet, the shortest verse in Scripture said, it didn't even say he dropped a thug tear. It didn't say, it didn't say, oh, well, Jesus cried. It said Jesus wept. And like, even in that passage, it said that he had compassion on the people around him, even though he knew. And so just contextually of the Jesus wept, he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, and yet he had so much compassion. Like, even though he knew he was going to fix the situation, it still moved him to weeping. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how many times do I bypass the emotions of my wife or my children just to get to fixing it, instead of having compassion for them? Even though I know what the answer is, just to empathize with them in the moment. So, man, it was awesome. It was freeing, and hopefully it was encouraging to others to see, okay, man, here's this black guy. He still looks athletic. He still looks like he's in shape and just a bold, strong guy. And yet he's crying. Like, he's got tears in his eyes. And that's okay, because he's still a quote unquote man's man, to just change what we think masculinity actually is.
That's good, man. That's good. And I think it's crazy because, like, Jason Wilson talked about how he had the experience of another man basically giving him permission to cry.
Right.
And I myself have seen that as well. I mean, I feel like I've kind of got unfair advantage just with my profession, being a counselor, mental health professional. I have to deal with other people's emotions, Right. And the majority of my professional experience has been, one-on-one sessions with, teenage, boys, even up to elderly men, I had one experience where I was working with somebody, and the gentleman was in his 70s, and I asked him a question about that was on this questionnaire that we had to fill out, and the question was, have you ever been abused? And I'd asked that question several times, to other clients. It was standard during our assessments. And so I asked this question, not really thinking that I would get a response. Usually people just say, no, we keep moving. But when I asked that question, this gentleman broke down. I mean, bitterly cried. You know what I'm saying? He was like 72, 74. His wife was sitting right there, and she was just kind of looking awkward. But this, obviously he had a burden of related to abuse that he'd been carrying for years. You know what I'm saying? And for whatever reason, he just broke down right there in that session, And it was interesting. In my experience, what I've seen is that for men, there's like two types of anger, like deep sadness that are just harder to kick than any other. And that's if somebody's been sexually abused or if dad wasn't there. And you really wrestle with that question, why doesn't he want me? That kind of a thing. Like, sometimes I've had to, in a session, I actually articulate that. And you're basically giving, a young guy an opportunity to kind of, process it. And I've seen, several times, just guys thugged out as they possibly could be, break down crying. You know what I'm saying? Because dad wasn't there. And they don't know why he left. They don't know why didn't he want me? Why wasn't I good enough for him to stick around? And a lot of guys are carrying those things. But unfortunately in the culture, we're taught that, even though people disagree with how many basic emotions there are. Some people say 7, some people say more. But, basically for us, it boils down to you're only allowed to engage in 2 emotions. That's either happiness or anger. Then you can't deal with sadness. You can't deal with fear. You know what I'm saying? You can't deal with, with shame. It's either happiness or anger, one or the other. That's the only, 2 emotions we're allowed to experience, and still be, manly, But I like what Jason Wilson was saying, that's he talked about the inhumanity of that. We're asking people and we're imposing upon them from a cultural pressure standpoint to be inhuman, to not, experience the full breadth of their emotional selves. And then we wonder why people are walking around, having heart attacks and diabetes and angry and beating their wives and all these kind of things. It's because they're only operating on 2 emotions when they have all these other ones floating around in the background that they're not even processing,
Yeah.
And so, for myself, I feel like I've kind of had that, I almost felt like I kind of had a head start in engaging my own emotions by having to deal with it professionally. But quite frankly, within the last 6 years, I feel like I've cried. Maybe it sounds horrible, but I feel like I've cried more than I ever have. I mean, Sean, some years ago, my wife and I experienced a miscarriage.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that. And even with that situation, I cried about it, but I would only allow myself to go but so far. And what's very interesting is, Sean, we used to play ball at Ebenezer over there with Deke.
Uh-huh.
And every Wednesday we would play ball. And one day, I don't think you was there that week, but one Wednesday I took a jump shot and missed it, wide open jump shot. And man, I went over to the sideline. And now, Sean, I'm not a cusser. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't think you've ever heard me cuss. You know what I'm saying? But
Right.
I went over to the sideline. Now, we're at a church, mind you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I go over to the sideline. I kicked over a chair and just said, GD, as loud as I possibly could. I mean, I just yelled out as loud as possible. And to be honest with you, like, it scared the crap out of me. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, man, wow. I thought I was over this thing with the miscarriage, but something's really wrong. I really need to get this thing worked out. And for me, that was a turning point to suggest, like, with all my clinical knowledge and all my experience about dealing with emotions, I, wasn't proficient with dealing with my own emotions in the way that I need to be. And so from that point, and then, unfortunately, I've lost some folks, my dad and my aunt, over the last couple of years. I've allowed myself to cry over these things. I'm saying, whereas maybe before I wouldn't, I try not to be a basket case necessarily, but when I feel it, I let it roll. You know what I'm saying? Because I think it's just healthy that way. You know what I'm saying? You can't keep things bottled up. I use the example all the time with my clients. If you got food in the fridge and you just leave it there for a while and it spoils, you might tuck it away in the back of the fridge, but it's going to stink. It's going to let you know it's there. You know what I'm saying? It's going to stink the place up. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we do with our emotions all the time. I'm saying when we don't have healthy dialogue about where we're coming from, when we don't cry it out, you know what I'm saying? God made us, he gave us the ability to, just kind of get it out through tears and that kind of thing. That's a God-given ability. And when we don't utilize that, then we find ourselves very unhealthy emotionally. It affects our relationships. It affects our ability to do basic things like work and every area of your life. There's nothing wrong with crying like a man. We got to do that. You know what I'm saying? In order to really, to keep our sanity and be functional. You know what I'm saying? There's no shame in it, whatsoever.
Yeah. That's good, man. That's really good, Lane. Jason's book was important for me because I'm still navigating this area of my life. My girls are fun. We joke around and goof around, and one of their jokes is, "Daddy, we want to see you cry. We're gonna try to make you cry." because they've never really. And then what they'll say is the only time we saw you cry is during worship. And so even that will happen. Probably not as frequent as I would like, but I will have those moments, man, where God is just sitting there and I feel His joy, and kind of like what Stack was talking about. You just feel the joy of God, and you feel so blessed. You feel like, regardless of what's going on in your life, you're just so thankful. You're just so grateful for God being God, and you just begin to cry. But I know for myself, I had my mom and my dad in my life, and my mom and my dad, were navigating a lot of their own issues, even as my dad was a gospel singer. And I moved out of the house at the age of 19, and I've always felt I've had to I've just had to weather whatever storm came by me because I had to deal with it myself. And I think when my wife and my kids, even more so, being the protector and so on and so forth. And so Jason's book was important because it as for me, it's helped me as I kind of was on this journey already, but it's even got me more on that journey to like what Stack said, stop solving problems and just listen. Be there emotionally, not just intellectually. And it's work, man. Lord, it's work. You know what I'm saying? Because the automatic thing that you want to do is solve the problem or deflect by whether it's cracking a joke. And you're so right, Lane. You deflect by either cracking a joke or responding in anger. You know what I'm saying? But never allowing myself to become tender. And that's something that I really have been working on, probably for the last year and a half. And Jason's book is really, really helping me navigate that thing. And so I definitely would encourage any man, who wants to grow and really wants to become the man of God that they want to be, that he wants you to be. You could be the defender and the protector and the builder and the survivor and all that type stuff. But like Scott Lane said, and really like Stack said as well, there is a release that happens in that crying. And I can tell you in those moments that I've been most frustrated, where I did allow at least a tear, maybe not 5 tears, but just 1 tear, right? Those times where I've really been frustrated, you know what I'm saying? And I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. I let that 1 tear out. And you guys know this because you guys seem to be on that path already. Man, that 1 tear feels so good when you let it out, boy. Oh my man, that joint no problems have been solved, but Lord, you still feel good. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what's up, man. That's pretty much our show. You guys have any last words?
I would just encourage people, man, to like you said, that interview was very introspective for me. I don't think you can listen to the interview that y'all had without looking on the inside and be like, damn, kind of self-evaluating. And just I would encourage guys, man, to really look at what the Bible has to say about what manhood is all about. You know what I'm saying? Like, the world would try to sell you on some false notion of what manhood is. Very interesting. I know within the last year, Styles P from the Locks had this interview where he was talking about some real stuff with, I think his daughter or the daughter-in-law committed suicide or something like that. And he broke down in tears. And it was just really interesting given the Locks back in the day was the iconic thug type dudes, you know what I'm saying? But, life gets at you, man. You know what I'm saying? And we delude ourselves when we act as if, life doesn't hit you with things that aren't cry-worthy. You know what I'm saying? And that really speaks to, again, what Jason Wilson was talking about in terms of just not stripping yourself of that humanity. You know what I'm saying? Being a man doesn't mean that you have to be a stoic, doesn't mean you have to be the Tin Man, but you can definitely look at Jesus, you know what I'm saying, as the perfect example of manhood. You know what I'm saying? Look at the prominent characters in Scripture. You know what I'm saying? And let's take our cues from Scripture as to what that template for manhood is, and then let's take that and shine it in the world so that other people can be set free as well.
Yeah. So good. What I would just chime in is just on thinking about healthy masculinity, of that we don't have to be limited to just the stock answers like, oh, you're bold and brave and courageous, but that men, just like Jesus was, we can be compassionate. We can be loving. Man, we can even nurture, words that don't get ascribed to men, in how we carry ourselves, and that even if we did come from a rough background, that doesn't have to define us. And one of the things that stuck out to me real quick that Jason said was, trauma is not the Black experience. We don't have to wear that like a badge. That there's more to it. There's positive things in American history. There's positive things prior to that. There's positive things in Scripture. Please go search it out. Please look for it. It is there to find your identity in something that's godly and good and admirable and uplifting and noteworthy. So that would be my encouragement.
Awesome. Well, we're going to leave with that. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for listening to the King Talks podcast. You can find out more about King at kingmovement.com. Also, you can subscribe to the podcast on any of your favorite podcast apps or websites. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Peace. We out.
Yeah. I brought the Kings with me on this one. It's a movement. Yeah. I had a dream. I saw black slaves in 2018, pulling them big king with a crown in the middle, looking like tug of war. I guess they forgot the inheritance of the Lord, dying over streets when God gave them the earth. It's all in the Bible, just do your research. White man's religion, that's just fake news. The cross hit Africa for Europe even knew. This ain't black versus white, this is dark versus light. But racism might distract you from the Christ on sight. So here's the Visine, me and my team. Dark world, but we flipping on a high beam. King, K is for the knowledge, I is to inspire. N for the nurture, the G is to grow higher. Jesus lit the match, so we all on fire. You see a crown under your attire, know you looking at a fighter.
My people, we're ready for mount up.